Now we fight!
Thank you for helping me to reach 800,000 subscribers. Here at the Click Empire, we're always trying to do new things. So for the first time ever, I proudly present to you grey squares on an orange background. 800,000 of them. See if you can find yours here. Remember, you have to be subscribed to stand a chance. And for my next party trick, I will attempt to lose as many subscribers as I can. So hit that subscribe button and follow me on Twitter. And if that didn't work, what better way to lose subscribers than to talk about CSGO's tick rate? Again. As could be expected, Kinsey's test of 64 versus 128 tick has been critically assessed and dissected by the community, which is good. But I hope it's being done for the right reasons, and not just because people want to continue believing that 128 tick's better. His test was to see if people could feel the difference that 128 tick makes. They play a round of deathmatch, then would decide whether or not the server had been 128 tick at the end. From this, you can already see that it isn't trying to see if there's a difference between 64 and 128 tick. It's trying to work out if people can feel a difference. An important distinction to make. To actually know and to quantify the difference is a lot more difficult, and I suspect will be the topic of hot debate for a long time to come. Because it is hard to prove it one way or another when there are so many variables at play. But try to see Kinsey's test for what it is. It's a great chance for people to test their belief that they can feel the difference. From the data he initially collected, I didn't find evidence that people could tell which of the servers were 128 tick, but I made it clear the limitations of the test and how it wasn't a definitive answer to the question. Unfortunately, it seems like many people have seen this as a reason to ignore the whole test and to continue believing that they can feel the difference. In fact, it's the people who can 100% feel the difference who refuse to do the test. It's infuriating. Like, these are the people that we need to do the test. We could finally get proof that there's a difference if they did, since clearly they can feel the difference 100%. But for whatever reason, they choose not to do it. As I have told many people since, if you think you can feel the difference, then test it for yourself. This is your chance. If you genuinely care enough to have a strong opinion about this, do it. The server is up, and it would be great to get more results. Please don't refuse just because you know there's a difference and don't need to prove it because you know already. Because that isn't proof, despite it being commonly accepted as such within the Counter-Strike community. But perhaps more infuriating than people who ignore the test are those who go out of their way to discredit it completely. These can be intelligent people who know a good deal about what they're talking about, and if they only put half as much effort into testing it for themselves, we might actually have reached a conclusion by now. As I've said, I have been open about the limitations of this test and have been cautious when talking about my findings. Sadly, this honesty and prudence has been mistaken as admitting that my findings are useless. They are not useless. I consider the test, and the conclusions I drew from it, to be a valuable first step towards answering the question once and for all. I even deleted a number of responses I typed to people. This will be seen as me admitting I was wrong. But actually I realised these people I was discussing it with weren't interested in getting results. They had already made their mind up, and I was achieving nothing by discussing it with them. And I do question the motives of people who are discrediting the test. Do these people genuinely believe the test to be entirely useless? Or does it just suit them to say this because they think that 128 tick feels better? I'll now address some of the comments my previous video received. Tick rate has been covered too much, so I shouldn't have made a video on it. No, you. It's hard to tell sometimes, but I'm sure a lot of these comments are memes and jokes. But as this is a proper topic that I'm trying to cover, I'll treat the rest of the comments I show as though they're serious. Starting after this comment. This is a more valid point. Some people think the test was ruined by people who can't tell the difference. I've seen the same logic being used in a number of arguments. Some people think that higher refresh rate screens would have shown the difference. Higher frame rates would have shown it. Some think higher skill levels would. The general argument is that the people who can feel the difference have their results cancelled out by the people who can't, for whatever reason. But just think about it. If everybody couldn't tell the difference, the results would have been right 50% of the time, which is what happened. Even if most couldn't, it would only take some people who could to push the average up above 50%, which we didn't see. Although what I just said also applies to monitor refresh rate, there's another reason for why it won't make a difference. I believe a lot of the comments have asked me this out of genuine curiosity, so hopefully what I'm about to say will explain it. I guess the idea is that a 64 tick server is enough for 1 tick per monitor refresh if using a basic 60Hz screen. But because 144Hz monitors are higher than 64 tick, People think that using faster screens would benefit from 128 tick instead. This sounds reasonable, doesn't it? The truth is, all frames you see, regardless of the monitor you use, are equally affected by interpolation. That is, what you see on screen is rarely lined up to a tick. It normally falls somewhere between them. As an example, if your screen shows something exactly halfway between 2 ticks, the game places everything exactly halfway between the 2 ticks it's between. A higher refresh rate screen will simply display more frames between the same 2 ticks of data. It can do this because the game already knows where things are a few ticks before it shows you. That's right, what you see on your screen is always delayed by a few ticks. Philip. This acts as a buffer against packet loss and other problems that delays over the internet can bring about. I did briefly talk about this last video, but it's still a valid question that I think warranted an answer. This one raises a good point. Some people believe that if the test involved bunny hopping, surfing, or throwing pre-learned grenade throws, that they'd be able to tell if the server was 128 tick. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if they could. Maybe a future test could focus on testing these particular activities, because it would be good to know. I guess it should have been made more obvious, but Kinsey's test was to see if people could tell the difference that 128 tick would bring to shooting and hit reg. Because even if you could tell a 64 tick server from a 128 for, say, grenade throwing, it makes them different, but doesn't exactly make one better than the other, which is generally the reason that people would want 128 tick servers. If you want 128 tick because you've learned grenade throws on it, then yeah, sure. I understand that, and nothing learned from Kinsey's test could be used to prove or to discredit that. A common way that people discredited the test was to say it didn't give people enough time to feel the difference. But what is enough time? Is it a full game? Is it 10 hours? There is no right answer for this. Obviously more is better, but the longer a test like this requires people to play for, the less likely they are to do it and the fewer results it would get. So one of the perks of having it test a 1 round minimum is that it leads to more results than a longer test would, which you'd hope would make up for it to some extent. But this idea that the test wasn't long enough is a frustrating one because there's no right amount of time to test it for. It's a valid disclaimer to add, but isn't a reason to dismiss the test entirely. There's a difference between not finding evidence of something in particular and not finding any evidence at all. The truth is that the data was too inconclusive for me to say that people could feel the difference between 64 and 128 tick. I did the right thing by saying that the evidence suggested they couldn't. And even this boring, unpopular sounding conclusion is something. I think this might be what this comment's trying to say as well. Evidence was found, it's just that it suggested that different tick rates can't be felt by the players on the server. What if, instead of complaining about 64 tick, I spent time learning how to play better instead? Let's go back in time. Back. Once when I was at school, I did a speech on why I didn't like fox hunting. I was in front of a crowd, sucked at public speaking, and was nervous. I was asked the question, if I had to kill a fox or a human, which would I choose? And it destroyed my argument. I had no answer for it, and it made me look like a fool. Afterwards, away from the pressure, I realised the question had absolutely nothing to do with the topic. And this is how I feel about comments like this. Intentional or not, it has misunderstood the point of the test, and attempts to derail it by attacking my ability as a player and by assuming it's about skill level in the first place. It's moot. It's a moot point. Next. Actually, that's it for the YouTube comments. The last and perhaps most important criticism was heavily discussed on Reddit, and it was regarding Kinsey's choice to include 47 tick. People did the test thinking it would be either 64 or 128 tick, and were asked if they thought it was 128 tick at the end of the test. People weren't told that 47 tick would be an option, and because of this, the test has been criticised for being misleading. I grouped 47 and 64 tick results together, which lessened this impact, but there were still ways that could have changed the results. Imagine you play on a 47 tick match and think, this isn't very good, so vote at the end of the round that you don't think it's 128 tick. Now imagine you play another round, but this time the server is running on 64 tick. This time, you feel it's better, so you vote that you think it's a 128 tick server. In a way, you're not wrong. You felt an improved tick rate, so voted for a higher option. I mean, you still thought 64 tick was 128, but at the same time, you can understand how you may feel that you've been unfairly misled. Luckily, using Kinsey's original data, anybody who wanted to could analyse whether 47 tick had impacted results, and some did. Thank you to I Eat Carrots, whose research and findings were fascinating. He saw if people could feel and rate the jump from 47 to 64, or 64 to 128, or the other way, and of the 190 people who did the test 2 or more times, 51 correctly felt a change in tick rate, and 139 chose incorrectly. In other words, if the tick rate changes, you're more likely to think it's gone the opposite way. And Mango Bay did his own testing by removing invalid and 47 tick results, and concluded that the results didn't change at all. I am very thankful to these people for taking the time to do further testing. I urge other people to do the same, should you think there was something wrong with how I or Kinsey originally reached our conclusions. We need people like this in the community if we're to get to the bottom of this. Be like them, and not like this. Like I said, I don't think Kinsey's test or my conclusions from it were perfect, but they can't just be dismissed for the reasons covered in this video. 128 tick may bring about a number of advantages, but a change in the feel of the game isn't one of them. Thank you to everybody who took part, to the people who genuinely asked questions because you wanted to know more, and to the people who did further testing themselves. And thank you to the 800,000 of you who follow me. And thank you for this suggestion that we should up the tick rate to plank time.